What a lot of computer work. Yep. Oh, pretty good. Pretty good. Keep them busy. Oh, let me turn off the recording. There we go. Okay. Oh, interesting. It's no the okay. I'm just starting a conference call and somebody just showed up, so I'm going to have to hop off. Can I talk to you soon? Yeah, probably tomorrow is better. I think so. Yeah. Okay. Love you too. Take care. Bye.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, let's see here.
Well, that was
Go
interesting.
ahead.
You're recording, yes.
Yeah, where is it being recorded?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I got on and it said recording, and I tried to turn the recording off, and it said ask the host to let you record, and I went. So.
Okay. Well, I can pause.
Emails, so I can only hope.
That's what we can do sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. People will straggle in, give them an extra minute or two here, I think.
Yeah. You know what? I'm going to grab the link and tweet it out, just like starting now. See if maybe we can get some last minute folks who forgot. Never know. Couldn't hurt.
Yep.
That's...
Do you have an agreed order that you're going to go in?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll just leave it to you to just do it.
Angela, I think it'd be best if I just made you host.
Oh, okay.
That way I know you can do it. Otherwise, I don't know. I may strand you with my techniques.
Okay.
Now I know you can do that.
Okay, thank you. And then are you co-host then? Can you let people in, or do you want me to watch for that? We don't have a waiting room, I don't think, so we're okay. Oh, okay.
We don't. No.
That's right, you didn't. Okay.
I like it as simple as it can be. We use a lot of older people and technologically sometimes challenged. So make it easy as possible.
Okay. I tweeted with the graphic.
Does anyone know where Lucy is?
Yeah, geographically, yes, Gurneyville, California, but
yeah.
But in terms of the internet, no clue.
Yes.
Or is it Guerneville? I think it's Guerneville.
I'm going to check something, Terry, because I think that Sarah will want to use this screen later. So I think I'll need to, will you or will I move the host to her? You don't need to. I am an attendee. I can share a screen. Click now and see if screen share pops up and you see a bunch
it does.
You're good.
We're all good.
It's good.
Then maybe you should put the the host back to me in case there's Zoom bombing or something. We got bombed last Sunday at church.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
after it
Hasn't had
was,
that happened in a long time.
I know, it was our social justice meeting, but it was on a public listing. So,
Well, when we get about, 5 or 10 minutes in, you can set up the waiting room so that only those we know can come in, but let the latecomers in first.
yeah.
And we're getting a bunch.
All right, we're getting a few more people here. But I think we should probably go ahead and get started, huh? So welcome, everybody. I'm Adam Wasserman. I'm one of the board members of UUJEC, UUs for a Just Economic Community. Welcome to our monthly webinar, which is sort of a series that we do broadly on the theme of climate change and the Green New Deal, but we have a pretty capacious understanding of what that includes. And so public banking sort of fits into this, I think, framework, because as I hope you'll see, it's an institution that has a lot of promise for helping communities deal with climate change and fund projects that help create a green economy. So before I introduce our speakers here and get started, just let you know about our next webinar in a month on March 11th. Our speaker then will be Maya K. van Rossum, who will talk about the green amendment process. I've heard her speak a couple times. She's very dynamic and well-informed. And she is like the moving force behind a sort of national movement to try to get states to amend their constitutions to give people the right to clean air, clean water, clean soil, and other environmental rights. So that will be, so I hope you'll be able to join us a month from now on March 11th. So tonight we're going to be talking about public banking, and we have 4 representatives from here, and I'm in New Mexico, and they're in New Mexico. They are all people who work with AFLEP, which is the Alliance for Local Economic Prosperity, which is a think tank really that is working to create a public bank here in New Mexico. And I hope it's a very active thing right now. There is legislation, and before our legislature is meeting now, and I hope they'll bring us up to date a little bit on where that stands and what the prospects are here in our state. So we have, I'm just going to do this in no particular order, Melissa Pickett, who is the outreach coordinator. She's a former banker. She's been involved with AFLEP for 3 years, and she has, I think, spoken to our 350 group before, and I know that she's a very, very well-informed speaker on this topic. We have Rebecca Jasso Aguilar. Is that about right?
Yes.
She's the
Yes,
social
it is.
justice outreach coordinator. She has a PhD in sociology. It looks like you've done work, especially in Latin America, on social movements, which
Yes.
I am sure is hopefully useful for understanding what's going on here in the US, maybe especially in New Mexico. Sarah Manning, who's the county outreach coordinator for Bernalillo County, which includes Albuquerque. She is a UU, right? Do I have that right? What is that?
Zoom
Hopefully we're
bombing.
not being bombed. And we have Angela Merkert, who is if I have it right, you're the executive director
Yes.
of AFLEP. So we have an embarrassment of riches, and I am going to, I think usually we run these for an hour and a half. So I invite you to divide it up and speak to us, for a half an hour or 40 minutes or something along those lines. And then we'll turn it over we have a small group, so we'll just have an open question and answer session.
Okay. Thank you, Adam. I'll start out and give you just a bit more background on myself. I've been an UU for over 35 years, including about 5 years as a district executive in the Central Midwest area. And are we good? And then, and I've been active in social and economic justice for all of that time that I've been engaged with the faith community. We really thank you for this opportunity to meet with you tonight. We want to start out with identifying ourselves as, and I want to reiterate what Adam was saying about we're a public bank think tank, and we envision local communities of economic, sociocultural, and environmental health and well-being. And we see one tool for making that happen in New Mexico is creating a public bank, a state public bank. A bit of background, New Mexico is a rich state. It takes in a lot of oil and gas revenue. We have 2 permanent funds that hold $27.4 billion in those funds as of the end of December. So in many ways, New Mexico is a rich state, although we have a high rate of poverty. Before the pandemic, we had over 21% poverty rate in the state, and that's only increased with the pandemic. We see the potential with the public bank of putting more emphasis on creation. We see the potential of creating community wealth in addition to the individual wealth.
The band Ian Yeager. No.
I, for some reason, can't. Well, guys, this is why you don't put out a public thing with a password. I can't kill this kid.
Can you ban the Yeager?
I can't. I just see no control of removing anybody, which is really weird.
How about if we all leave and come back again, like,
Yeah, I don't-
No.
Should be some way to ban someone who's Zoom bombing.
So,
Well, report into Zoom, but that doesn't help us now.
Can Terry do anything? Who's hosting? Is it you, Sally, or Terry? Is Terry hosting?
Terry's hosting. He made me a co-host, I thought, but I'm not seeing any controls that
Oh, well, that Eden Yeager seems to be gone now.
Looks like he's left. Zoom may have pulled him. Let's go back to our subject and hope he's gone for good. He pulled out, let's see.
We may have some of our own people coming back in too.
Yep.
I know Lucy just came in too.
Is there a way I can open a waiting room?
There should be, it should be a,
Only if you set it up when you create the webinar.
Right, but I mean afterwards. 'Cause
I know that on one call I had one that didn't have one and then I set it up later, but I don't know what the settings were on the Zoom account to make me do that.
okay.
Yeah, it's too risky without a waiting room.
It's,
Okay, here, I can do
well,
it.
especially if you put the password protected link out in public, which
I've enabled a waiting
do
room.
one or the other, but not both. All right, I'll watch for people coming in. But Angela has not come back.
Well, that was discouraging.
Our others 3 speakers are here, however.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to talk while we're waiting for Angela? Or does
Somebody
that
sent
make
me a
your...
message saying they could not get back in. It's a 505-603-8400 number. I'm not sure who that was, but was that Angela?
I just spoke with Angela and she's tried a couple of times to get in. That 8400 number is her phone number.
Okay,
That's it.
But she suggests we just move on to Rebecca.
okay, let's watch for her. Hope she can come back. Sorry about that, everybody.
All right. That's a new experience.
It is.
It is.
What's cool for me is that I have always been able to kick Zoom bombers out really fast in the past. This is the first one that succeeded with me. So
Well, there were 2 of them.
Oh, there were.
no,
Oh.
it wasn't. I think it was the same one. But anyway,
It could have been the same
Same
person, but there were
one.
2 different
onward,
screen
onward.
names.
We don't want-
Okay. Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, all right then. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you all. I have been working with a group to establish a public bank in New Mexico since 2015. This effort to establish a public bank here began since probably 2011. And in 2018, a task force concluded that a public bank for the city of Santa Fe, which is where all this effort began, that this public bank for that city was not viable. But one of the recommendations was to explore the possibility of a state bank. And that's what we did. There were 2 groups, the one in Santa Fe and then a group in Albuquerque. And at that time, it just made sense to join forces. And we have been working together for the last 3-4 years. And as we speak, our bill, the Public Bank Act, is being considered in the current legislative session. Perhaps you know that there is already a public bank in the nation, the Bank of North Dakota, established in 1919, which has been turning profits and investing them in the people of North Dakota for 100 years. Now, let me just underscore a few points of what public banks are and are not. A public bank is a financial institution for the deposit and investment of our public dollars, our taxes, and our fees. It is funded with state money. A public bank is not a fund, it is a bank. It does not give out grants, it makes loans. Public banks hold a bank charter legally subject to applicable state, federal and international banking rules, regulations, and oversight. A public bank's decision to invest are guided by a purpose or a mission established by the public. Its purpose is to benefit the entire community, not shareholders, not investors, but the entire public. Public banks are owned by the people through their representative governments. We as the people of New Mexico will own our state public bank, just like the people of North Dakota own theirs. It is not a retail bank. You and I as individuals cannot open an account in a public bank. In fact, we encourage people to keep banking with their credit unions or community banks. A public bank is a banker's bank. It supports local credit institutions. In North Dakota, the number of community banks per 100,000 people is 4 times the average in the United States because the public bank is not their competitor, is their supporter. I want to emphasize this because there is a misconception that a public bank is a threat to the existence of community banks. And this is one of the strongest arguments utilized by those who oppose public banks. The community banks in North Dakota love their public bank. In New Mexico, we have not been able to get the community bank to join us, but the credit unions are some of our strongest allies. The way in which a public bank supports local credit institutions is by developing partnerships with them, by making loans to them at a smaller interest rate. It can do this because it has low overhead costs, because it does not spend money on retail services, branches, ATMs, marketing, or in paying million-dollar bonuses to CEOs. Also, it does not pay taxes because it is a state entity. So there are lots of ways in which a public bank saves money and passes on these savings to their local lending partners, which are the ones that know their communities, and they can help connect people with potential resources available through a public bank. That's why the coexistence of a public bank with credit unions and community banks is harmonious and productive, as the state of North Dakota proves. The Bank of North Dakota was created by farmers in 1919 as a tool to deal with an unjust and unfair financial system, not unlike today. Farmers had to deal with the artificial suppression of grain prices and increasing cost of farm supplies, thanks to out-of-state dealers, and with the high interest rates on farm loans provided by banks in Minneapolis and Chicago. So North Dakotans took matters into their own hands. The Bank of North Dakota has responded to the state's needs since the beginning. During the Great Depression, when teachers were paid with warrants rather than cash, the Bank of North Dakota paid them in full, while other establishments took 15% off. Again, not unlike your payday lender today. In the 1940s, the Bank of North Dakota sold back farmland, which had been foreclosed during the 1930s, and it was usually sold back to the original families who had owned it and had been allowed to remain on the land and farm it. In addition to economic development support, the Bank of North Dakota has provided recovery funding during disasters and agricultural relief loans during hard times due to bad weather. During this pandemic, the Bank of North Dakota has been very agile handling monies from the Paycheck Protection Program, disbursing funds more rapidly and efficiently than any other state in the country. It is truly a big bonus having a public bank in times of crisis. The Bank of North Dakota has created a very diverse list of loan programs in partnership with loan community banks and credit unions throughout North Dakota. Many of them address very specific needs and priorities, including loans for beginning entrepreneurs, loans for those that want to invest in value-added agricultural products, and loans for affordable housing. In one very noteworthy example, the Bank of North Dakota recognized the need for financing and supporting human services, and it specifically developed their Startup Entrepreneur Loan Program to include childcare homes, groups or centers licensed by the Department of Human Services. Another example of the agile nature of the Bank of North Dakota in addressing real needs is the loan program developed for housing and living expenses for students working on becoming licensed therapists after the need for more counselors in the state of North Dakota was identified. We expect that through our New Mexico Public Bank, loan programs can be created to address specific needs that have been identified and prioritized. We have a vibrant farming culture, but also a situation in which we import food that could be produced in the state, and a lack of processing plants that cause farmers and ranchers to lose revenue by sending their product out of state for processing. In large portions of our indigenous communities, the only alternative to finance a small enterprise is a local payday lender. The current banking system does not address these needs. We also expect our public bank to provide loans to help us move toward a more sustainable economy, away from fossil fuel and towards renewable energies, including loans to close down coal plants, clean up, and related activities. And with that, I will turn it over to Melissa.
Melissa, you're muted.
It's in the upper, yeah, you got it.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you. That was supposedly that was one of the top phrases for the year of 2020. You're on mute. looks like it's going to be that way for 2021 too, right?
Oh, no.
Gosh. Well, Angela, we'll miss you. And Angela referred earlier to New Mexico not being a poor state, and that's really true. Yet we have a high rate of poverty here, and we're a good example of a state that has room to do better. Our economy, we're rated number 47. In crime, we're rated number 49. And we're 8th in the US in overall food insecurity and 3rd in child food insecurity. And we're rated number 2 in a list of the 10 poorest states. So we always are at the bottom of the good list and the top of the poor list. Mm-hmm. So we have a ways to go. And we see the public bank as a tool within a larger systemic system of change. I'd like you to think for a moment from a big picture perspective. We're talking about state-owned public banks, but let's think in terms of our finance system in this country in general. When I was a banker, which has been many years and years ago, I was with a community bank, and it was a time in banking where we made loans almost literally on a handshake. The community banker knew their customers, and it was a family, and it was a family to work for. In the early 1990s, when interstate banking was put into place, that started to change the banking climate. And what we're seeing today is a result of what has been a progression of the big banks in infiltration into our local communities. So our finance system all over this country now is being run by the big banks. That's where our destiny for our own health and well-being lies. It's interesting to note that in 1994 nationwide, the small banks had a 50% share of the industry's assets, but by 2019, that share had dropped to only 17%. Community banks, and by the way, we're defining community bank as a locally owned bank, typically with assets of $3 billion and under. Community banks account for less than 1/5 of all industry assets, but they supply nearly half of the lending to all small businesses. If you're not familiar with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, I suggest that you put that on your list of websites to follow. They do great work in the area of supporting local And so if you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend that website. But they did a study and they found that there is a close correlation between the number of small businesses helped in the state and the market share of community banks. Small banks and credit unions offer advantages just by virtue of being locally run that big banks cannot match. They know their communities, they know their borrowers, they're able to make loans to new and growing businesses on the basis of factors that aren't easily quantified and don't fit into rigid parameters of big bank lending or the algorithm of approval. Now there are just 4 banks that hold 40% of the banking sector's assets, and that's Bank of America, Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, and Wells Fargo. In our language today and the way that our culture is seeing things, global expansion of the industrial economy and consumer culture is the very meaning of progress. And I would like to just say that and invite us to imagine what is possible if we all collectively could begin to change things from a definition of economic well-being as growth to a framework and a path of progress that suggests the way forward is localism. What is localism? That means growing our food close to home and trading it at our local markets. It means allowing diverse cultures and individuals to follow their own dreams, unimpeded by the pressures of centralized profit making. It means the rebuilding of and diversifying our farms, local economic revitalization, and cultural and biological diversification, I suggest, is a roadmap and a way forward. And this is where the public bank comes in. So how? What are some examples? Well, let's consider the area of energy. The New Mexico Public Bank could address the biological breakdown that we're in, the environmental crisis, and reduce the impacts of climate change by financing clean energy infrastructure, by increasing renewable energy lending and incorporating its values for regeneration and sustainability into its lending policy, not the bottom line being profit and return back to shareholders. Big distinction. Financing solar is a focus where a public bank could make a big difference. It could finance solar energy projects in low and moderate income neighborhoods. It could finance utility scale and smaller scale infrastructure build out, rooftop projects, community solar development, which would be lower electric bills and accelerate our transition from fossil fuels. It could assist energy efficient projects to weatherwise houses and commercial buildings against increased temperatures of climate change. Another example, there's a great surge of interest in strengthening connections to the community and the land. I think that's true in New Mexico. I think it's true all across the country. And our connection to the land is our real lifeline, as we've seen in this time of the COVID crisis. So think of our food system. If we had public banks in place now, we could begin to rebuild our food system by focusing on healthy soil and making a shift to regenerative agriculture. We could stabilize our local food supply chains. In New Mexico, we have almost 25,000 farms and ranches. We export 97% of what we produce, and we import 95% of what we consume. Crazy, right? A public bank would be instrumental in supporting and strengthening supply chains and food systems. There's great opportunity and innovation by what the public bank could do in filling gaps. What's needed, what's necessary. And I'll give you an example of a carrot. If you think about a carrot about this long, New Mexico used to be the top exporter of carrots in the country. But what happened is The consumer decided they didn't want big carrots, they wanted little carrots. But in New Mexico, the farmers don't have any places where they can process the big carrots to turn them into little carrots. So we have to export our carrots to California, where they're processed and turned into little carrots, where they're then shipped back to New Mexico so we can have our little carrots. So that's just an example. Another example is in the southern part of our state, we are pecan producers. And those pecan producers, the growers, have to ship their pecans to Las Vegas, where they're processed and packaged and turned into pecan pieces for our chocolate chip cookies. What would happen if those farmers could get together, put a food hub in place, and process their own pecans? And every state will have examples of their own, just like this. A public bank would be instrumental in supporting and strengthening supply chains and food systems. And Rebecca talked about some of the loan programs. The Bank of North Dakota has programs to support farming, beginning farmer, family farm loan program, first-time farmer finance programs, livestock waste management system loans. What we're really needing to do here is to think big. And we said earlier that the Credit Union Association is supportive, one of our biggest allies here in New Mexico. And the executive director of the Credit Union Association, he's so great, he's a terrific guy, he's a big picture thinker. And he says the following, and I'll quote him: "There's a need for creativity and rethinking age-old practices that may be good at preserving the status quo, but fail to bring about increased opportunities to build infrastructure and solve decades-old housing problems and create jobs through new capital investment." I like this quote because to me, it invites us to open up the doors and windows to be curious and to think outside the box and to create a better pathway for our economy and for our financial systems. A public bank is an important part of the system that will help keep our money out of Wall Street so that it's safe, local, and working for all of us. And the heartening soul movement to all of this is that we can all work together and build better as a country. So I'd like to turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Melissa and Rebecca. I want to go off script a little bit because Angela somehow is not back with us. And she was going to show you a video, which I cannot, but we do have a graphic that you may not be familiar with. We call it the bicycle, but it's a bicycle with a flat tire. And I'm going to see if I can pull it. There it is. See there. Can you, nope, I need to do share screen first. I'm sorry. Okay. Can you all see that? You can.
Yes, we do.
Great. Okay. This is the bicycle, and it looks like two wheels, which is why we call it a bicycle. And you can see that the wheel in blue is flat.
Mhm.
You're not going to get very far with that one, but that's our current system. So how a public bank that we envision in New Mexico, and this is actually based on the Bank of North Dakota system. We as citizens pay our taxes and fees to our government. And the government does all the things that government does and pays for that. But governments always receive more money than they need immediately because we tend to, taxes are due on a certain point and they come in quarterly and all that good stuff. So they're large economies. And what do they do with the excess? Well, they do what we're all told to do, which is they invest it in Wall Street. And Wall Street is code for investing in the stock markets, in real estate, but also in derivatives and some speculative things because they always return more profit. Well, the problem is that there's that gap because the stock market does make money for people over time, and it gets returned to the state government eventually, but not as much because Wall Street always takes its cut. Wall Street is there to make money for their investors. So that's what happens. And somehow us citizens, we just keep paying more money in. We do get services from the state government, but that's what we get. And when big banks come in and buy up little banks, and Melissa didn't tell you the story of the bank that she worked with, but her little community bank was bought 3 times and is now owned by one of the big 4s. So it's no longer a community bank. It has to cover all of the expenses of headquarters. And so it's very expensive for what used to be a community bank to make a small loan, because their overhead is so big. So they like making large loans, which means that people who don't need $1 million in a loan, they only need, you know, a restaurant that wishes to redo their kitchen or something would probably need what, $30,000? But $30,000 to a branch of, say, I don't know, big bank Y, that's not very profitable for the bank, because their overhead is the same whether they're making a huge loan or a small loan. So they prefer the huge loans. So if we go to the tire that is in green, which is the system that we are working for, is that those same taxes and fees go into that same government, and that government pays for everything that's always paid for. And the excess money that the state government has on a daily basis deposits it into the state bank. It doesn't leave the state. It stays in New Mexico in our situation. And the state bank would invest it in partnership with local banks, community banks, credit unions, CDFIs, which are another form of credit institution that does a lot of work with nonprofits. And the loans get paid back to the state bank. So the state bank makes money and makes more loans to the credit unions and the community banks. But the credit unions and the community banks and the CDFIs invest in small local businesses, in infrastructure for their communities. And when you invest in a small community, when you invest in a business and they become bigger, they hire more people.
Mhm.
And those people earn more. And those people pay more in sales taxes, let's call it that. And they buy more because they can, and the money keeps circulating. So in a way, we're in the Southwest and we're always worried about water, and we have aquifers, but water in an aquifer doesn't do a thing for the ranchers and the farmers and the people who want to take a shower, because the water has got to come out of the aquifer first. So what we're doing is we're suggesting that we take some of our money, and it is our money, it's owned by us through the state government, out of Wall Street, where it's invested in. New Mexico money is literally invested in New York City real estate, which just, they could invest it in New Mexico real estate. They could do that, but they don't. Anyway, so we're keeping the money flowing, and that is how a public bank really helps invigorate our local communities and creates not profits for stockholders, but it creates more money available flowing through our communities. And as we know, if there is no access, there is no justice. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And by the way, we have sent a couple of things to Adam, and they're posted. That graphic is posted on your website, so you can look at it. But so now you've got a view of how a public bank works, of how it developed and what it does in North Dakota, and what we envision it could do for New Mexico. But I want to share a study with you, which is also given to Adam. And it was done in 2019 by a think tank in Washington, D.C. that specializes in the 18 states from Maine to Minnesota. So this is the Northeast Midwest Institute. And their researcher looked at whether public banking would be beneficial in these 18 states. The states have different economies, different resources, different size populations, different histories, and very different needs. And I actually hope that you do take a look at that study. It is 117 pages, but don't let that freak you out, because on almost every page, there is at least half the page taken up in either footnotes or graphs. So it's actually, and it's very well written, so it's readable, is my point. But it does give you an analytic view rather than the theoretical view that many of us really have. We want to make the world better, but the people who want to make sure that this works right really want to know the facts behind what we think would change. And so this bank gives you a good way of understanding some of those data points that are important. In the end, the study recommended, and I'm quoting now, all Northeast Midwest states adopt a public bank and do so with close attention to their circumstances and needs, tailoring the bank specific to the nuances of its state. And it goes on to say, public banking is not a panacea, but it can move states in the right direction for addressing critical investment gaps and realigning state resources with state interests. And so that's worth doing. But we received some interesting advice at a symposium that AFLEP and another group called New Mexico First did recently. And it's on local development and sustainability. One of the presenters actually is the head of a nonprofit that does grant writing with and teaches grant writing to other nonprofits. And he made the point that all successful enterprises could answer 3 questions as they developed. And if you can answer these 3 questions, you will be successful. And the questions are, what's the concept? Who owns it? And what does it cost? So concept, ownership, cost. And actually, I was thinking about that and then realized when we had this conversation when our son was about 5 and he wanted a puppy, we had that conversation with him. Okay, who owns it? Well, owning means you clean up after the puppy. Owning means that you walk it. Owning means that your mom doesn't, whatever. And who owns it? Yeah, that's you. And I know you want to take the puppy everywhere, but you can't take the puppy to school. So that's part of concept. And then the cost. And actually, my husband and I did not have the cost conversation with our child, but we did have that conversation. So if you take a look at those concepts, they also apply to public banking. And we currently have 2 bills. They're identical, one in the House and one in the Senate, to establish a public bank, a state-owned public bank here in New Mexico. And as these bills were developed over time, we came up with a concept. We did a lot of research. We had put together a pro forma, an analysis of what the first 5 years of the bank would look like, what we thought the management structure would be, how it would relate to other existing New Mexico enterprises like the Finance Authority and several other things. And then it came time to get the bill written. And in New Mexico, bills are written by Legislative Council Services, which is a part of the legislature. And it took 7 months to write this bill. And it went through 5 revisions because we were answering what's the concept, who owns it, and what does it cost? And what we found is that when we could answer questions very specifically about how is the bank capitalized, how would it operate, what are the transparency issues, how are the profits used, then we would be able to actually give our legislators courage enough to be bold and to risk enacting systemic change, because public banking is a systemic change. And so when you've got to give legislators all the information that you want, you've got to think ahead of them and really find out what their concerns are and what turf people are going to get worried about. But our job is to help our legislators understand that it is better to use public monies for good, for public good, rather than to earn interest and dividends in the global market. So we've come to the end, and we always close our talks with an ask. And so we're going to ask things of you today. We're going to ask two things of you today. And here goes. We hope, first of all, that you are, or you will decide to become part of your state's public banking team. It's really exciting. It's a lot of work. It's very important, and we hope you join in this movement. And second, we'd like you to look at 4 bills that are working their way through Congress, and we'd like you to support their passage. One bill in the House is called the Public Banking Act, and that would allow public banks to have access to the Federal Reserve's system, and therefore access to the overnight window, which may or may not be important depending on how the bank is set up. And a bill in the Senate is the Postal Banking Act, and that would reestablish post office banks. This is the oldest form of business that we have in this country, of banking. They were eliminated several decades ago, but it's time to bring them back, because that gets banking into local communities where there are no banks and really cuts into the payday lender business. So that's a good thing. There are 2 other banks. One would create a national infrastructure bank. That one's in the House. And the Banking for All Act, I'm not too sure, I don't know much about it. Apparently it requires Fed member banks to provide digital pass-through accounts, like digital dollar accounts, to residents and citizens and to business domiciled in the US. So that's what we have to tell you today. And now we're interested in your questions and your thoughts. And thank you very much for listening. It's not that we didn't give you a lot of information.
Thank you much. Let me just say that I apologize to Angela publicly, because the bomber used her account. So when I reported the bomber, she got dumped accidentally. And I am really sorry about that, but she should know. And I just let Zoom know that she should have no negative implication of that. And I don't know, apologies. So.
Thank you. She was wondering why that happened, and I'm hoping that does not impact her Zoom calls tomorrow morning.
I got an email from Zoom, and I wrote back to them and said, no, this happened and so forth. And I copied Adam and Terry on it, because I don't have Angela's email address. So
okay,
connect that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have some comments. One of them is, I'm looking at how our country keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger businesses. And of course, larger banks aren't going to loan to small people because they don't know them, and it doesn't fit in their algorithms, as you say. And as this happens, it's kind of like colonialism, particularly for rural areas, because we're working to buy stuff from big companies that send our money elsewhere. And then we put our money in the bank, and that money gets sent elsewhere. And it gets very hard to support rural areas. And this is one of the problems we're having as liberals, that our rural areas have been so decimated because we're just taking the money out and we're not putting it back. You mentioned payday loans, which I find to be just abhorrent that we have such things. Interestingly, the woman who was shot in Congress on January 6th was from California, and her business was having challenges. And so she got some loan, like a payday loan, and was paying somewhere around 160% interest. And it was pointed out by some pundit that, you know, and she's from California, and if California, with all the liberals and Democrats that we have there, can't treat their citizens and protect their citizens better than that, then maybe Democrats don't have a reason to get elected.
Well,
And I think there's some validity to that. We need to take care of people. We used to have usuries. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, we still do. The payday loan folks are the users. Yeah.
Can you say something about why only North Dakota has one? What's fighting it? It seems so wise. I don't understand why we haven't spread it more.
Yep.
It's Wall Street, Lucy.
Yeah, that's
That's
exactly
what's
right.
killing Washington State.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. It's because we have big.
Washington State, we tried to get a public bank too, and Wall Street has killed it so far.
But how? How?
The North Dakota Bank dates back to 1919.
Right.
Well, the crash happened in 29, and Wall Street has been fighting to keep its control of everything ever since.
But the other thing is that in the 80s, 1980s and 1990s, the banking rules changed dramatically. Citizens United is nothing. It was Glass-Steagall. It was all of that, which encouraged two things. It encouraged big banks to buy little banks and get bigger because they could cross state lines to do that. It also said that you could have two different kinds of bank, and you have this new investment bank, which was part of regular banks. And so that changed the way the banking industry looked at how to make money.
Yeah, originally, you know, the savings and loans and the community banks were not able to invest in all those.
That's right.
things that the investment banks did. And when that wall got taken down.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You know, I have a story about the way it used to be with banking. My grandparents would borrow money in the spring to plant their crops.
Of course. Yeah.
And the banks made the loans due in, I believe, November. And the price of corn in November was 25 cents a bushel. And the banks would buy the corn. And in the spring, when corn was 50 cents a bushel, the banks would sell it. So their return on investment was fantastic. And Roosevelt came in and he loaned the farmers the money they needed to pay off the bank. And then the farmer could sell the corn when they wanted to. And they got the difference between 25 cents and 50 cents. So they got like 6 times as much profit as they were getting with the banks. But think of what a perfect setup. That they hold the money for 5 months, and then they can get 5 times as much.
Yeah.
It was.
I'm sorry, I want to pursue this more because I still don't get, I understand Wall Street, et cetera, but is it that state banks can't make enough money to survive, whereas Wall Street can? Is it an advertising thing that people are lying about what public banks can do? I don't get still
I think it's
why we can't fight Wall Street.
There's a
It's a
lot
power
of
thing.
misinformation, Lucy. Lucy, there is a lot of misinformation. I mentioned that the community banks here in New Mexico are not on board with us yet because they are listening to the financial interests, the bankers, and they tend to align themselves with them. Partly because probably they see themselves as big bankers like Wall Street wannabes, but also because they don't have all the information. They do not open themselves to listen to us. They basically put a barrier, a wall, and don't listen. But, we are making progress. California passed a bill 2 years ago. The governor signed it, and they should be having, I think the bill allows them to have, I think 8 banks in 10 years, 8 public banks in 10 years. Now, when California puts together its 8 banks, you'll see the whole country is going to turn to them and look at what they are doing. Because California is what, the 12th or the 7th largest economy in the world, and they're going to have public banks. The eyes of everybody are going to be on them.
We also, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I wasn't sure.
I have a comment on that. I have a
Okay,
comment too. Mona, I'm trying to talk here.
Yeah, but I'm putting my headphones on. You need to put yours on too, because you're.
I'm trying to talk, Mona. I don't have headphones. Yeah, so I've got one of the issues that I'm aware of in Washington State and other states is when you start a new public bank, often a major question is how do you capitalize it? And right now, like New Mexico would be well positioned. They could use some of their permanent funds or things like that. And many states aren't well positioned. I think North Dakota took some years.
Get him to stop talking.
Mona, I'm trying to talk here, and so I, like North Dakota took some time to capitalize its original bank. It took some time so they could actually have nothing to loan out, and it would be possible through the federal government for the Federal Reserve to help solve some of those issues, but we don't have it yet.
Take my headphones off.
Okay, you better stop, Dick.
Go ahead, Melissa, what were you going to say?
oh, I was just gonna also say, one thing to remember is that the public banking model, it may be more foreign to us in the United States because we have such an economy based on an entrenched capitalistic society, and we think in certain ways, and profit is the thing. But the public banking model all over the world is not a new concept, and public banks exist in many, many countries throughout the world very successfully. So some of it's a timing thing. We also are run by a Federal Reserve System that entrenches us into a particular way of managing a system. We also have to remember that what we have is an incredibly complex system. And I certainly don't understand how it all works and comes together, but our financial system is extraordinarily complex.
Yeah. So the Federal Reserve was 1913, right? North Dakota's bank was 1919. And I don't know what happened in most of the next 100 years, but I've been working or listening to Public Banking Institute since about 2012. And yeah, there are a lot of New Jersey, New Mexico, California. There are a bunch of them springing up, and who gets there first, we'll see.
We'll see. And in funny ways, I think New Mexico has a pretty good chance. We'll find out by the end of March. We'll know by the end of March because our legislature meets for 60 days on odd numbers years and 30 days on even numbers. So we got to get things done fast. So but because we're fortunate with our reserve, with our permanent funds, that we can take money from a permanent fund and reinvest it, not spend it, but reinvest it in the public bank. So we do have that advantage, but also because we're kind of, our reputation is that of, oh, it's New Mexico. Are they part of us? Are we a state? And that's the old joke. But because we are a little bit more insular from the rest of the states in some ways, people tend to ignore us. And I think in this case, that's an advantage.
Yeah.
you know.
I think the problem with Wall Street is the power thing.
Yeah.
Community banks would take away some of their power and some of their profits. So, and they have power. They're very powerful.
And the thing that we should attempt to make the community banks understand is that this would give them more access to credit, would enable them to
Yes.
be more
Exactly.
productive in their communities, would not harm them. It's not, you know, we're not taking away their retail customers like the rest of us. We'd still,
Right.
yeah.
Mhm.
It
So
would be
what they will
interesting-
tell you is the community banks will tell you that they're worried about losing their deposits. And the deposits they're worried about losing are most of our cities and towns and
Okay.
counties have a relationship with the community bank. And they're worried that those relationships will be shifted over to the New Mexico State Public Bank. And that is not true. But until they see that, they're never going to believe it, because they're always looking at competition. It's hard to work together when you're always assuming you're working with your competitor.
Yeah. In New Jersey, I think most of our towns and counties bank with the big banks, so it would actually help the few smaller banks we have left, but yeah,
So does the state of New Mexico.
exactly.
Yeah.
Different.
Mhm.
Yep.
Mhm.
And I found your 3 presentations very cogent and very helpful. I hope we can see them in writing too. That would be helpful. But I would also be interested in how you are promoting this in your state. You know, if UJEC were to take this on and try to spread it, what are the steps one takes to promote it in a state? What has worked? What did you learn didn't work? You know, that kind of thing.
Melissa, you go for this one.
Well, I love the question because it causes me to think into what is it that we've done and what is it that we've been doing, because literally when we started about 3.5 years ago now, we started with a group of 11 people, and the four of us, Angela, Rebecca, Sarah, and myself, and all of us being a little group of folks that started. And when I look back and think what we've done as 11 people and how the ripples and ripples and ripples and ripples have happened, it's quite astounding. We began by, you know, getting together. I mean, it did start in Santa Fe, as Rebecca talked about, but you know, we began by putting together this thing called AFLAP, the Alliance for Local Economic Prosperity, and that became a critical piece of foundation with a vision and mission of thinking about how we can truly make changes in the economy. So we had a vision to start. We had a pretty solid, agreed upon vision, and literally what it's been over, and Sarah and Rebecca add to this, but what it's been over the last 3.5 years to get us to where we are now, it's literally been doing these kinds of programs where we talk about it. Any opportunity that we have to talk about public banking, to bring the idea forward. It's been talking, we 11 people multiplied ourselves by talking about it, and then those people go out and talk to people, and it's literally been a relational way of getting the word out and sharing the mission. And it's the education is the critical piece of this. It's a massive education project, which we're not nearly through with at all. In ways, we're just scratching the surface. And this is a huge paradigm change. And so that means that we're trying to get people to think differently about economy. This is a paradigm change because it's a support of how we can build up local. You know, we're losing our hardware stores, we're losing our drug stores, we're losing our grocery stores, of the, as it
The
was
rural
considered,
post offices.
the rural
Yes.
post offices. Yes,
Mhm.
the rural economies are just being devastated. And when you go into these places, I was just in a smaller town, Silver City, in the southern part of our state this weekend. And, you know, there's a Wells Fargo bank, and there's a Family Dollar store. And you can pretty much count in any rural community you go into, that's what's there. And, you know, the lifeblood of our economy is rural. So the stakes are high, and getting the word out, organizing, being advocates for, and being willing to have a steep learning curve like this. You know, none of us were experts on public banking, not that we are now either, but the learning curve has been like this, you know, and every time we talk to someone, we learn. Why? Because we don't have all the answers. We have to research and figure it out. So it's well worth the dive into it because the stakes are high. And quite honestly, COVID, as it has been difficult, and I wouldn't want us to go through this again, but I have to say that it has shown the frailty in the system, and it's shown the weaknesses. So as we've been out talking about the frailty and the weak links, COVID has demonstrated it. So in a way, COVID has been an ally for getting our message out about why we need a public bank.
But
Melissa,
also, I think one of the advantages has been Zoom, because we were originally saying, okay, you're going to need to go to the far corners of the state, and you're going to need to find people, and you're going to need to talk to people. Well, now we just do it electronically. And it does mean that you're not putting wear and tear and spending hours in the car. New Mexico is a big state.
Mhm.
And so it's easier in some ways to reach people. But we've all been reaching out, and Rebecca has done amazing stuff in rural communities. And as soon as you get off the I-25 corridor, the north-south corridor, or the I-40 corridor, you're in, they cross in the middle of the state in Albuquerque. You're in very rural areas. And when you think of the crisis our country is in, caused basically because people are really frustrated, angry, depressed, don't know what to do because the local economies have shut down and they don't know where to go. They don't know how to live. And so if we get impetus back into our rural and our local economies, there will be more jobs for people, and our crisis, people will see a future again. But right now, there are a lot of people, and January 6th showed this to us again. There are a lot of people who just don't feel part of our culture, of our society.
Would
they've
enlisting
been hurt so
bankers
badly.
or people with banking experience be helpful if you're trying to put together an advocacy group?
Yes.
I mean, okay.
Definitely. You know, I haven't been in banking since 1991. So I'm a dinosaur, I'm an old school banker, but I can tell you that it's been really helpful, especially in the beginning when we were getting started. We went out and called on community banks because we wanted them to come in and join us, which they haven't done. But it's very helpful. And when we put our banking paper together, which you know, you would have other initiatives would have the advantage of the work that we've done, because we share our banking paper, we share our research, we share our bill, etc. So, and we've been benefited by what California has done. So we benefit each other as we go through this. But it's been very helpful to have finance people involved, and we have had finance people. Myself, we have a UNM professor who was a banker and also now teaches finance at the university. He was instrumental in helping us create the banking paper, and it really makes a difference to have those finance voices
You speak
involved.
the same language.
and language.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And know what all of those weird ratios mean, because I don't.
Right? It's not Greek to you guys.
Right. But Sally, you mentioned the Public Banking Institute, and Ellen Brown, her books are
Yep.
very important, a bit difficult to wade through because she is an economist. And so she uses language that she's got a great glossary, which I used almost on every, but it really was a good way to start.
Yeah, they have monthly calls on Friday afternoons, and
They
I
do
have
indeed.
a number
Yes.
of those, and
Mhm.
they're all very welcoming and helpful to
Yeah.
groups working across the country.
You
Do you have a
have-
title of her book?
Our concern is, and apparently there is an implementation board in place now, and Joan and Walt are involved in that. Or I think Joan is on the board. How do we keep the politicians from getting their grubby little hands on these things and skewing with the professional judgment of the actual bankers who we would prefer to have running the thing? So,
Well, in the beginning, you don't want the professional bankers running the little thing until they've been educated into another way of thinking.
well, the problem in New Jersey, we are the pay-to-play state. So we figure, the banks are, the politicians are going to direct everything to their favorite pet donor project. And how do we?
yeah. The banking paper that we put into place did make recommendations for how this is to be transparent, and the transparency and the firewall that needs to be in place.
Yeah.
And that's very important when you're putting the bank structure together. So in our case, we have a citizens group that will be appointed. They will be appointed by the governor, but it very specifically lists where the people will come from, who they'll be, and how the board of directors will be selected, et cetera. And because this is an initiative of the citizens, we are the ones that are ultimately responsible for how the bank will succeed.
Right.
Because that's going to be based on having a voice, taking our voice to our legislators and saying, here's what's happening in my rural community. Here's the needs that we have. And we want to go to our community banks, and together we're going to come forward to our legislators and say, we want this kind of a loan program because our pecan farmers are hurting here, or we need housing, and we want the bank to have a housing program. So this will require, if when we get this passed in New Mexico, that's not where it ends. It actually is where it begins, because how successful this is really going to be determined by we the people.
So
And that's why, if I may intervene here, it's so important to make sure that those board of directors, even though they end up being selected, by the governor or some other body, you want to make sure that the pool of board members where they are selected, each one of them is just as good as the other. So whoever gets elected is not by recommendation of somebody, but the community got involved and proposed them. And that's why it's so important not just to have bankers and financial people in your group helping you, but also have community members, groups involved in social justice and community development and all those things. For example, we have reached out, and going back to how do we do this practically? Well, each one of us has a particular circle, social circle in which we function. And several of us have more links with groups, community groups, social justice groups. And so we reach out to them and we say, we want to make a presentation about public banking to you. Will you give us some space in your monthly meeting or whatever? And they would say, okay, yes, come in. And so we would do that. And then we would ask them, can you put us in touch with another group that you are familiar with that may be interested in listening to us? And sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. And so that's how we spread it out. Before COVID hit hard here in New Mexico, we had lined up a couple of maybe 2 or 3 meetings in Gallup, which is on the west part of the state. And that was going to require us to drive and spend the night there and see if we could meet with three groups of people. We had to cancel that a few days before because the state went into lockdown.
Yeah.
And so we couldn't do that anymore. But now, for example, if we were to do those meetings, we could do those in 3 different days without having to drive 200 miles.
Yeah.
But
I asked the question, would current bankers or retired bankers be better for trying to make this happen in your state or any other state?
Well, I wish I could say that the community banking community bankers would be on board with you. What we've found is we've spent a lot of energy trying to bring them along, and that wasn't a mistake. And it still isn't a mistake, and our door is still open should they want to come to the table. The reality is they oppose a public bank at this time. I think that'll change down the road once they make a shift. But the National Community Banking Association, I believe, is sending out talking points to community banks about public banks. And the reason I believe this is because there are very specific talking points that we hear over and over and over again from same talking points, different banks. And we can tell immediately when we go out and talk to bankers that they have received those talking points. And that's coming from our local or our state association, but it's also, I believe, coming from the National Association. I was on a call today that the Schumacher Center in Massachusetts. It was a call where they were a webinar where they were talking with 3 community bankers. And I purposefully put into the chat a question about public banks because I just wanted to see what would come back. And that spurred a lot of other comments in the chat and interest in public banks. So other people started making comments too. So finally, the person that was leading the discussion asked the bankers, they said, we're getting a lot of attention here and have questions about public banks. What do you think? Well, guess what? I heard those same talking points come out of their mouths. There was like a shutdown, and then I heard the talking points. And one of the key talking points we hear is there isn't a need for it because we're doing everything that needs to be done. Yet what was so fascinating is one of the community bankers, this was pretty shocking and in a way frightening, and I'm going to quote this. He said, this was the president of the bank. He said, "We are becoming extinct." At the same time, they also talked about disruptors, the threats into the community banking system. And they named technology advances being a disruptor because the community banks are having such a hard time in all kinds of ways. And technology with the fintechs, financial technology companies are coming in and everybody can do banking on their phones. So the community banks have a lot of threats. They have a lot of pressure going on, and they'll talk about that, and they'll talk about the fact that they're dying. Yet it's difficult to get them to move out of the box. And they're regulated. You know, they have regulators that come in and do audits, and they have to meet what the provisions are in their bank audits. So
Okay, but as much as we want the big banks regulated and so forth, they've got staff that can comply with all this stuff, which the community banks find themselves in big trouble.
Right.
with.
That's
That's big
correct.
trouble,
They're
and that,
people.
and with technology too, they can't keep up. Technology is changing so fast that and that's where a public bank can really help them too, because Bank of North Dakota, one of the things that they've done is they've actually helped the community banks keep up with with their technology.
Hmm.
So there's a lot that can get put in place with the public bank that I think that you can't have a myopic viewpoint. You know, it does require big picture thinking.
Yeah.
Well, I do know
So-
that North Dakota's economy has been very stable in
Oh, yeah.
very unstable times, and it's
Yeah.
all because of the public banking.
Yes.
And it
Mhm.
looks like we're in for a lot of unstable times the way
Mhm.
things have been going.
Yeah,
Yes.
And the
Definitely.
other thing is that the Bank of North Dakota prides themselves on being agile. And that's something that Rebecca talked about. So that when there's a disaster, they're very good at they don't call FEMA, they call the Bank of North Dakota.
Wow.
Because it's faster, there's less paperwork, the money stays within the state, all of that good stuff. And North Dakota is prone to massive floods in the middle of the winter and in the spring, and they're devastating. And the same, they're prone to all the rest of this stuff that we are. But their bank can shift money around when it needs to be shifted around. And they, when the first PPP loans came out, the Bank of North Dakota said basically, oh, we're going to funnel it through us and we'll distribute it, which they did very effectively to the point
Wow.
where more money per loan.
Capital.
Those loans were larger
Going
than in
out,
any
yep.
other state. Yeah.
What's also interesting is that the community banks did better on those than the big banks did, judging by
Yeah.
the UU money list. Everybody who had a small bank is like, well, I got mine. And we're like, what
Right.
does that tell you? Move your account, put it where other people,
Well, I would assume that they probably did a better job with minorities and unbanked people then in getting the PPP out.
yeah.
Is that,
So
is that fair?
are they concerned that the public bank will take the loan part of it? Because you don't have individual accounts, so that's not a competition, but you do make the public banks do make loans. Are they worried they won't get to do that?
No, they're worried that they'll take deposits away from them because, say that you're a mayor of a city, of a small town. You need banking services.
Right.
And so you need a place where everybody's checks gets cleared. You need to be able to write payroll checks. You need to be able to do all of that stuff. And they're worried that the towns will put their money, take it away from the community bank and put it instead into the public bank and have the public bank do all of that stuff. And that would be truly devastating because what banks do, and banks are the only critters that humans have ever invented that can do this, is that banks can make money. So banks can loan out, and there are formulas about this depending on the size of the bank, but the deposits into a bank get immediately loaned out at 8 to 10 times their face value.
So they can receive deposits from a town, but not from an individual.
correct.
The
public bank.
No, community banks can receive
No, a
deposits from
public
any
bank,
bank.
a public bank.
That is, our public bank would receive, at this point, it would receive only deposits from the state government.
Okay, not cities
Oh,
then,
Not
Yeah.
cities.
nor counties. Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, now, does North Dakota's
But
public
they
bank
could.
take deposits from communities other than the state?
Yes, they do.
Mhm.
Yes,
Mhm.
they do.
So that you could expand it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but every state is different. So you have to create a bill, the law, the bank that works with your state's situation and needs.
And just to clarify about the loans, the way the loan programs work is that the borrower would go into their community bank or credit union and apply for the loan. If it was a loan that the credit union or community bank wanted to go to the public bank to guarantee, then the bank goes to the public bank, but the borrower doesn't. And in fact, the public bank might even be transparent to the borrower because it's a banker's bank. It's not a retail lending bank.
And as it is, if the community bank gets this loan application and it's either more than they can do, they have to go to Wall Street, or for whatever reason, so they go to Wall Street, which is, taking its piece. Instead, they get to go and get backed up by the public bank.
Exactly,
Yes,
exactly.
right.
That's exactly it. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
I think some study is required here.
It's a new
Good, that's
concept.
great. Perfect.
Yeah.
We were just
Yeah.
talking about Vimo yesterday, and my husband said that they are doing incredible amounts of business, and that it's blowing up. People our age probably are not going to start doing Vimo, but the kids and like to use their phone and everything. I'd be afraid I'd lose my phone, and then that would lose everything. So
There's a real problem with the digital currency and all these money transfers by currency. They can turn off the ones and zeros anytime they want, number one.
That's right.
I mean, I like my
That's right.
with the mattress. Yep.
Yeah. Mhm.
One
I
quick
don't-
comment about North Dakota. I lived in North Dakota for a while, and it was only 600,000 people there at that time. And you knew the governor, you knew your legislators, you knew the mayors, et cetera. The culture of North Dakota was populist. I mean, they had a common
Yes.
silo for,
Yes.
it wasn't just the banking. So part of what we're talking about is creating a different culture. You're talking about systemic change, but culture change in terms
Right.
of
Mhm.
we want to do this together kind of thing. Anyway,
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
well, it's
North
9.
Dakota would not put up with a tenth of the corruption that New Jersey has. It's just
right.
the whole
Well,
country.
it's because you
Yeah.
know each other, and they would get selected out pretty quickly. I want to thank you very much, Melissa, Sarah, and Rebecca, for taking your time to explain all this to me. I have sent many emails to my legislators, and every time I get something in public banking, I would forward it because of North Dakota's success with it, but I really didn't understand it. You've really done a wonderful job of making us clear up our brain and our thinking process on that. And I can't wait. The papers that you sent us are on our resource page for UUJEC, and you click down.
Yep.
And it's under webinars, and it's at the bottom of your webinars. There are 3 different documents that I put there yesterday.
Yeah.
So if we can, I think we should let you go. Unless you
Thank
want to
you all
say.
very much.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you for the
Yeah, thank
opportunity.
you.
It was a
Very, very
pleasure.
informative.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Very good.
Hey,
And
Good
apologies.
night.
Bye-bye.
good night.
Night.
Bye.